How are ya, Reb Yid? That's really how it's spelled. How are ya? How A-W-Y-A, Reb Yid. Joey Newcomb asking on the last song of his album titled How Are Ya, Reb Yid. A good Vach, Shavua Tov, a good week to everybody. It's great to be with you and starting the week with some beautiful learning. We've got great classic famous teachings on tonight's daf. Let's get into it after we light up the darkness. Who is with us on a Saturday night starting the week off right? Sharon, checking in from Las Vegas. Welcome to the American Southwest, Sharon. James in Indianapolis, Yehud in South Carolina, Patrice in Utah, Tom in PA, Bella in Florida, Bill in mid-Missouri. What is he saying? Hope everyone's Shabbos was rejuvenating this week. The year's longest, or is that next week after the solstice? Well, wait a minute. Shabbos is always the same length. It's always the same length. The question is, what time of day does it start and what time of day does it end? But it's always about 25 hours long. Lucy from Minnesota, Candy in Texas, Barry in Indianapolis, Paula, shalom from my heart. How beautiful. Shalom to you, Paula. Chaim in Charlotte, Renee in Indiana, Janice in New Orleans, Michael in Indiana, Christo in Houston, Stephen in New Hampshire, over there on the YouTube side, Marjorie in Georgia. Welcome, everybody. Tonight's episode of AT Daily, sponsored by Lita Ann Smith for the healing of Avi ben Avraham. May Avi ben Avraham have a complete and speedy recovery. We say Amen, and Lita, may you and all your loved ones be showered in blessings. We say Amen, and thank you for enabling us to share more Torah with more people by sponsoring an episode. We're still in our annual campaign. We're in the second half. The later half is going to be over at the end of December. All donations matched until then. Help us make our budget for the coming year so we can continue our programming and build the AT app. Nina's putting the link in the comments, but it's donate at accidentaltalmudist.org. All right. Where are we holding? This is Daf Vav, page 6, here in Tractate Megillah, the 11th volume of the Talmud. These are the laws of Purim. We are in chapter 1, completing our discussion of Mishnah number 2 and opening our discussion of Mishnah number 3 tonight. We pick it up at the bottom of page 6, and we've been talking about this distinction between cities that were large enough and to have a wall around them, a walled city, a proper city in ancient times, meaning when Joshua led the children of Israel out of the desert and into the promised land, any city that is known to have been a walled city at that time and is existing here at the time that the Talmud is being compiled, 1,500 to 2,000 years ago. So in such a city, they celebrate Shushan Purim, meaning that they read the Megillah of Purim not on the 14th of the Hebrew month of Adar, but on the 15th. Everywhere else, it's on the 14th, except for these small villages that have market days when they go into the bigger towns, and there it was permissible when the calendar was being set by the Sanhedrin in Jerusalem to have the Megillah reading advanced even to the 13th, 12th, or 11th of the Hebrew month of Adar, so that they could be in a town square where the people were gathering for the market. Apropos of these laws, we've been discussing which cities were walled at the time of the conquest of Joshua and which were not. The Gemara relates that Rav Asi read the Megillah in the city of Huzal in Bavel, right? So it doesn't have to have been a city necessarily. Shushan was not in the land of Israel. It was the capital of Persia. Other cities in Babylonia, the Babylonian Jewish community, might have been ancient enough to trigger this rule that they would read the Megillah on the 15th. So Rav Asi read the Megillah in the city of Huzal in Bavel, in Babylonia, on both the 14th and the 15th of Adar, because he was uncertain if it had been surrounded by a wall since the days of Joshua the son of Nun, or not. Huzal was an ancient city, and it was possible that it had been surrounded by a wall at the time of Joshua. And some say a different version of this report, according to which there was no uncertainty. Rav Asi said, this city of Huzal, of the house of Benjamin, the tribe of Benjamin, was walled since the days of Joshua son of Nun. Incidental to the previous discussion of concerning, we had discussed the status of Tiberia. So Tiberia, or some say in English Tiberias, a city that is in Israel on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea, ancient city. Now, how ancient could it be if it's named after a Roman emperor? But the Roman settlement was built on what had already been an ancient city on the Mediterranean Sea. So was it walled at the time of Joshua? And we saw there's already a dispute about that. Well, even if it was walled at the time of Joshua, it didn't have a wall all the way around because it was a coastal city. So does that count as a walled city for the reading of the Megillah on the 15th of Adar? We already had that discussion. Now we're going back to discussion of Tiberia. And the Gemara relates that Rabbi Yochanan said, when I was a child, I said something that I later asked the elders about, and it was found in accordance with my opinion. I said that Hamas is Tiberia. And why was it called Hamas? On account of the hot springs, Chamei, Tiberia, that are located there. Hot springs, Chamei. And I said that Rakas is Tzipori. And why was it called Rakas? Because it is raised above the surrounding area of a river. And I said that Kinneres is Ginosar. Right, Kinneres, the Sea of Galilee is known in Hebrew as the Kinneres, and that this is Ginosar. And why was it called Kinneres? Because its fruit are sweet, like the sound of a harp, a kinnor. And Rava said, is there anyone who says that Rakas is not Tiberia? Isn't it true that when a great man dies here, images of the Talmud are often in the Bavel Jewish community, and they lament his demise there in Tiberia, back in the land of Israel? And what do they say? Great was he in Sheshach, i.e. in Babylonia. Why is it called Sheshach? See Jeremiah 25:26. And he had a name in Rakas. Furthermore, when they bring up the casket of an important person to Tiberia, they lament his demise as follows: you, lovers of the remnants of the Jewish people, residents of Rakas, go out and receive the dead from the deep, i.e. the low-lying lands of Bavel. That's why they often say, go up to Israel or down to Babylonia. Both in terms of altitude, kind of north-south, but also the idea that spiritually you're at a lower place if you're not in the land of Israel, even though because of the Roman persecution in the Holy Land, there ended up being more established, longer lasting, sort of, deeper, higher centers of Torah learning in Bavel. And that's why the Talmud that we're reading is the Talmud Bavli, the Babylonian Talmud, because that Jewish community was able to complete the Talmud, whereas the Jewish community, the sages working in the land of Israel, suffered so much from the Roman persecution that the Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud, is unfinished. Similarly, the Gemara relates that when Rabbi Zera died, a certain eulogizer opened his eulogy for him with these words: the land of Shinar, which refers to Babylonia, and which was Rabbi Zera's birthplace, conceived and bore him. The land of the deer, Eretz Yisrael, where Rabbi Zera lived as an adult and rose to prominence, raised her delights. Woe unto her, said Rakas, for she has lost her precious instrument. It is apparent from these examples that Rakas is Tiberia. And rather, Rabbah said, Hamas is the hot springs of Gerar that are adjacent to Tiberia, and Rakas is Tiberia, and Chineris is Ginosar. And why was Tiberia called Rakas? Because even the empty ones, Rekanin of Tiberia, are as full of mitzvahs as a pomegranate is full of seeds. Now, that metaphor, simile, I guess, is one that we mentioned way back in Tractate Brachos, the first volume of the Talmud, and it was referring to the entire Jewish people, that all the Jewish people are filled with mitzvahs. Even the unobservant, totally secular Jews, when they do deeds of kindness, that is a mitzvah, looking out for one's fellow. And so they have mitzvahs to their credit, said that particular passage in Brachos. So but here that same idea is being applied to the residents of Tiberia. Why particular there, singling them out among the whole nation of Israel in the land of Israel? Because that was an important center of Torah learning and scholarship. And Rabbi Yirmiyah said, in fact, Rakas is its real name. Why is it called Tiberia? Because it sits in the very center, Tabor, of Eretz Yisrael. And Rava said Rakas is its real name. And why is it called Tiberia? Because its appearance is good. Tova re'iyata. Right? So why would they be making a kind of interpretation of the name Tiberia and likening and saying that it's called that because it's connected to the Hebrew words tabur or tova veriata? If we know it's named after a Roman emperor, Tiberius. And the reason is, and I think this is very important, and we should remember this, it might have been named after a Roman emperor, Tiberius, by the Roman governor in the area who established the settlement as a local seat of government for the Roman Empire. That may well be true. That doesn't preclude us from looking at the name that this town in the land of Israel ended up bearing and asking ourselves, well, what does that name mean in the Holy Tongue and what can we learn from it? Likewise, in our lives, all the time we can say, well, why did such a thing happen? And then you could just say, well, cause and effect. Somebody got in their car that morning and they were driving at such and such a speed, and somebody else was driving such and such a speed, and there was a car accident, and these two people meet that wouldn't have met before, and that's why it happened. And then you can go deeper and say, well, everything that happens for a reason. Why did God, who administers everything that happens in our world, lead these events to this place and this particular occurrence, and what can we learn from it on the deeper level? And of course, we're invited to look at the deeper level of everything that's going on. And the Gemara asks, is Kitron really Tzipori? Wasn't Kitron in the tribal territory of Zebulon? This week, right, we just finished today in synagogue the book of Genesis. This was the last Torah portion, Vayechi, and now we immediately started reading Shemos, the book of Exodus, the first Torah portion in the book of Exodus. And so the Torah portion that we just had last week and read in synagogue this morning was the blessings that Jacob bestowed on his 12 sons and said, this is what will befall you in the end of days and where this is all headed. And I just heard a beautiful talk from Rabbi Einhorn at Yavne here in our neighborhood saying, Abraham heard a direct message from God that Yitzhak was destined to be his successor in the holy mission of the Jewish people, Isaac. And Isaac didn't get a direct communication from God, but his wife, Rebekah, did. She knew that Jacob was destined to be the successor in that mission. But Jacob didn't get a memo like that, and neither did Rachel or Leah. So he thought it was going to be Joseph because Joseph got the message in those dreams that he had as a child. But then Joseph was dead. As far as Jacob knew, when his brothers sold him into slavery, Jacob thought he was dead. And then during those many years when he thought that Joseph was dead, and his plans and his thoughts about what the future was, and that it was all going to be that it was going to be Joseph entrusted with the family mission was dashed. and he didn't know where he was or what was going on. But then a new leader emerged from the other brothers, and that was Judah, right? Judah, in his episode with Tamar, and in the way that he took responsibility for his brother Benjamin, when they went to get food in Egypt, and he stood up to this viceroy of Egypt and took responsibility. He was a leader. And so when you look at the blessings that Jacob bestows onto Joseph and Judah, you see that he's telling both of them that they're destined, for greatness and for leadership of the Jewish people. And that's why we have these traditions that there's going to be two messiahs, right? From the Jewish people, there's going to be a Messiah, the son, Mashiach ben Yosef, who's going to pave the way for the ultimate Messiah, the Messiah ben Judah. Right, or Ben David, when King David is a descendant of Judah. And so Rabbi Einhorn was saying that he was sort of like, he's giving the kids not so much a message from God about what was going to happen in the end of days, but rather an aspirational inspiration that you should all take strength about what it's going to be like for you. And you've got two great leaders in your midst. And the rest of you are going to find your very specific roles. And in those blessings, it said that Zebulon was going to dwell by the seashore, and there's going to be partnered with his brother Issachar. Issachar was going to be Torah scholars, and Zebulon was going to fund the yeshivas with their merchant trade because they lived on the coast. Now, referring to that, when eventually the tribes entered Israel, and the tribe of Zebulon was given a portion by the coast, so Zebulon said, before the Holy One, blessed be he, the tribe of Zebulon said, Master of the universe, to my brothers, meaning to the tribes whose territory is adjacent to mine, you gave them fields and vineyards, whereas to me you gave mountains and hills. To my brothers you gave lands, whereas to me you gave seas and rivers. And God said back to him, nevertheless, all will need you due to the chilazon. What's the chilazon? It's a snail. God said, don't worry, you've got the snail. You've got the snail. Why should he be, comforted by the fact that there's a snail in his territory? Because this is the special snail from which the sky blue dye would be made, the techelis, right? When we're commanded to have a blue thread among the fringes that we wear in our tzitzis, that was found in the territory of Zebulon. So everyone would have to come to Zebulon for the holy, the ink that would allow them to have, their ritual fringes, the holy fringes. So you will have the chilazon. Where am I? The chilazon. Why did I lose my place? Chilazon, which is a small sea creature residing in your territory that is the source of the dye used to make the ritual fringes, the tzitzis. And as it is stated in Moses' blessing to Zebulon, they shall call the people to the mountain. There they shall sacrifice offerings of righteousness, for they shall suck the abundance of the seas and the hidden treasures of the sand. That Moses says that, Deuteronomy 33:19. And Rav Yosef teaches about this verse, treasures. This is referring to the chilazon, the snail, which is found in the waters of Zebulon. Hidden, this refers to the tarit, a type of sardine, which is also found in Zebulon's coastal waters. Sand, this is referring to the sand from which white glass is made. Glass was a real luxury item in the ancient world. And the special sand used to make the best glass came from this territory. So Zebulon said to him, to God, well, all of these resources are indeed found in my territory, but, Master of the universe, who will inform me if others take them without my permission? So, okay, they're found in my territory, but, they're just there on the beach. Anyone can come and take it. So God said to the tribe of Zebulon, there they shall sacrifice offerings of righteousness. And this shall be a sign for you that anyone who takes these items from you without making payment will not prosper at all in his business, right? So you might be able to pick that stuff up without paying for it, but there's a price to pay. You'll have no success in your business if you take it without paying as you should. Now, it is clear from the exposition of the verse in Judges that the territory of Zebulon did not contain fields and vineyards. And if it enters your mind to say that Kitron is Tzipori, so why was Zebulon resentful of his portion? We're still defining some of these ancient names. We're still figuring out, were these walled cities? The cities that are in a spot right now, at least at the time that the sages are talking about 1,500 years ago, do those cities correspond to cities mentioned in the Bible, which are much older and would have been walled cities at the time of Joshua's conquest? So the city Kitron, mentioned in the Bible, is it Tzipori or not? So if it enters your mind to say that Kitron is Tzipori, so why was Zebulon resentful of his portion? Wasn't Tzipori in his territory, which was a land that was vastly superior with regard to its produce? And if you would say that Zebulon's portion did not have quality land flowing with milk and honey, didn't Reish Lakish say, I myself have seen the land flowing with milk and honey around Tzipori, and it was 16 mil by 16 mil, a large area. And if you would say that the part of his territory that flowed with milk and honey was not as vast as that of his brothers, the other tribes, well, didn't Rabbah bar Bar Chana say that Rabbi Yochanan said, I myself have seen the land flowing with milk and honey over all of Eretz Yisrael, and the size of the fertile land was like the distance from Bei Koveh to the fortress of Tulbakni, a total of 22 parasangs in length and 6 parasangs in width. Now, a parasang is 4 mil, and a mil is about a kilometer, right? So a parasang is about 4 kilometers, maybe 2.5 miles. Consequently, the area flowing with milk and honey around Tzipori was 4 by 4 parasangs, which is more than the fair share of one tribe among 12. And the Gemara answers, well, even so, fields and vineyards were preferable to Zebulon. The fertile land in Zebulon's territory is in a mountainous region, which makes it more difficult to cultivate. The Gemara comments, the language of the verse is also precise according to this explanation, as it is written, and Naphtali was on the high places of the field, which indicates that Zebulon's complaint was due to the fact that Naphtali had fields. And the Gemara concludes, indeed, learn from here that it is so. We're not really studying about the jealousies of one tribe for another and the portions that they got. We're really establishing, could it be that Kitron is Tzipori? New subject. The Gemara continues its discussion with regard to identifying places mentioned in the Bible. And now that we've been started talking about these places and whether they were walled cities or not, so we're going to just continue talking about locations identified in the Bible and where do they correspond to in more recent times. Rabbi Abahu said, an Ekron shall be uprooted. We read that in Zephaniah 2:4. This is an allusion to Caesarea, daughter of Edom, which is situated among the sands. Okay, so Caesarea, you can visit it now, right? That's another city on the coast, a little north of Tel Aviv. We'll be going there, God willing. You know, COVID doesn't stop us. The Maccabiah games are going to be in Israel this coming summer. I'm coaching the Masters golf team, and where are we playing? In Caesarea, right? So that's Caesarea. But here it's being called the daughter of Edom. Okay, so this comes up all the time, that when our sages speak of Edom, which basically means red, they're talking about the land and the people who are descendants of Asaph, right? So Jacob's twin brother Esau, in Hebrew Asaph, his descendants would be called Edom, red. He was red, and red and ruddy. And this is understood to refer to like all of Western civilization based on the idea that this would become Rome. Rome, the emperors of Rome, the empire of Rome, is understood to be the spiritual and powerful descendant of Asaph, right? So when we're talking about Edom, we're talking about Asaph's descendants, and it's referring to Rome and everything that has come out of Rome since. So what does it say? Ekron shall be uprooted. This is an allusion to Caesarea, the daughter of Edom, which is situated among the sands, right, on the coast. Caesarea was primarily populated by Greeks and Romans, and it served as the seat of Roman rule when the Romans, who are identified with Edom in Jewish literature, ruled Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel. And it was a spike stuck in the side of the Jewish people already in the days of the Greeks, as it was an obstacle to the spread of Jewish settlement. And when the Hasmonean monarchy meaning Matisyahu and the story of Hanukkah. And then they kicked out the Greeks who were ruling over the land at that time and reestablished, independent rule, at least for a little while, in the Holy Land by a Jewish sovereign. When the Hasmonean monarchy prevailed and triumphed over them, over the Greeks, they called it the captured Tower of Shir. And Rabbi Yosef Bar Chanina said, what is the meaning of that which is written? Zechariah 9:7, and I will take away his blood out of his mouth and his detestable things from between his teeth. And he also shall be a remnant for our God, and he shall be as a chief in Judah, and Ekron as a Jebusite. And the verse should be understood as follows. And I will take away blood out of his mouth. This is referring to their house of altars, where they sacrifice offerings. And his detestable things from between his teeth. This is referring to their house of piles, where they heap their ritual stones. And he also shall be a remnant for our God. These words are referring to the synagogues and study halls in Edom, right? So the Jewish people had already spread out of the land of Israel. There was already a diaspora. It not only went east and south to Babylonia, it also went west, right? There was a Jewish community even in Rome, the capital of the Roman Empire. There were other synagogues outside of Israel and throughout the Roman Empire. And he shall be as a chief, aloof, Hebrew word aloof, in Judah, and Ekron as a Jebusite. And these words are referring to the theaters, tereatriot, and the circuses, kirkasayot, in Edom, where the officers of Judah are destined to teach Torah in public. And Rabbi Yitzhak said, and the children of Dan went up and fought against Leshem in the book of Joshua. What is Leshem? This is referring to the city that was known in the Talmudic period as Pamyas. Ekron shall be uprooted. This is referring to Caesarea, the daughter of Edom, which was a metropolis, metropolin, i.e. a capital city, a city of kings. And there are those who say this means that kings were raised there. And there are those who say it means that kings were appointed from there. Meaning the kings of Edom, the kings of Rome, were appointed from among the residents of this city. And the sages said that the fortunes of Caesarea, which represents Rome, and the fortunes of Jerusalem are diametric opposites. If, therefore, someone says to you that both cities are destroyed, do not believe him. Similarly, if he says to you that both cities are settled in tranquility, do not believe him. If, however, he says to you that Caesarea is destroyed and Jerusalem is settled, or that Jerusalem is destroyed and Caesarea is settled, believe him. As it is stated, because Tyre, T-Y-R-E, has said against Jerusalem, aha, the gates of the people have been broken, she has turned to me, I shall be filled with her that is laid waste. Ezekiel 26:2. And Tyre, like Caesarea, represents Rome. Consequently, the verse indicates that if this city is filled, that one is laid waste. And that city is filled, this one is laid waste. The two cities cannot coexist. And Rav Nachman Bar Yitzhak said, the same idea may be derived from here, a verse dealing with Jacob and Esau. And the one people shall be stronger than the other people. Genesis 25:23, teaching that when one nation rises, the other necessarily falls. And so we saw that was the prophecy, I'm pretty sure, that Rebecca received about the twins battling in her womb, and that was destined to be a kind of a struggle for all time, right? And so, I mean, it's certainly, at least is the way that sages saw it, when the land was being oppressed so much by the Roman Empire, that Rome had ascendancy in that period, and therefore, the power was way down. The Jews were disenfranchised, and they were subject to the authority and oppression of Rome. Eventually, Rome would fall, and then the fortunes of the Jewish people would rise again. And Rabbi Yitzhak also said, what is the meaning of that which is written? Grant not, O Lord, the desires of the wicked, further not his evil device, so that they not exalt themselves. Selah. Psalm 140, verse 9. Jacob said before the Holy One, blessed be he, master of the universe. Grant not to the wicked Esau, the desires of his heart, as he wishes to destroy us. Further not his evil device. Do not remove the muzzle. Further not his evil device, zemamo. Do not remove the muzzle, zamam, that constrains him and prevents him from breaking out and gathering further strength. And this is a reference to Germania of Edom, i.e. Germany, which is near the land of Edom, Rome, as if the Germans would go forth, they would destroy the entire world. I mean, the idea that Germany would be a massive problem for the Jewish people, this is being written minimum 1,500 years ago, probably more like 1,800 years ago. And Rabbi Chama Bar Chanina said there are 300 young princes. We're on 6b now. There are 300 young princes with crowns tied to their heads in Germania of Edom, and there are 365 chieftains, Marzavne, in Rome. And every day these go out to battle against those, and one of them is killed, and they are preoccupied with appointing a new king in his place. And since neither side is united, neither side is able to achieve a decisive victory. It is these wars between Rome and the Germanic tribes that act as a muzzle upon Asaph, Edom, Rome, and prevent it from becoming too strong. Now that we said, Rabbi Yitzhak said this idea that if you hear that Caesarea and Jerusalem are both doing well or both doing badly, don't believe the person. It's always one is doing well and the other is bad, or vice versa. Now we're going to hear another teaching of Rabbi Yitzhak in the same form, it's kind of similar format, and it's a very famous teaching from the Talmud. So here it is on Megillah 6b. Rabbi Yitzhak said, in the style of the previous passage, if a person says to you, I have labored and not found success, do not believe him. Similarly, if he says to you, I have not labored, but nevertheless I have found success, do not believe him. If, however, he says to you, I have labored and I have found success, believe him. Makes sense, right? Somebody tells you, yeah, they're very successful. They didn't have to work hard. No, don't believe him. Tell him he worked really, really hard, but never had any success. Don't believe him. But the Gemara comments, this applies only to matters of Torah, as success with respect to Torah study is in accordance with the toil and effort invested. You work hard at Torah study, you will see benefit from Torah study. But with regard to success in business, it all depends upon assistance from heaven, as there is no correlation between success and effort. Now, I'm sure a lot of business leaders would take issue with that statement. And nevertheless, we do see there are a lot of people who work so hard, they never get rich and massively wealthy. And there are other people who are just so lucky, they happen to have the right product at the right time, or they're just born into the right family, and they're rich and they never had to work hard. And even with regard to matters of Torah, we said this only with regard to sharpening one's understanding of Torah. As the more one labors, the deeper the understanding of the material he achieves. However, to preserve what one has learned, it is dependent upon assistance from heaven. Not everyone achieves this, even with much effort. Not everyone has that kind of memory that can retain everything that they've learned. That's a matter of luck. And Rabbi Yitzhak said, if you see a wicked man upon whom the hour is smiling, i.e. he is enjoying good fortune, do not provoke him. As it is stated, contend not with evildoers, Psalm 37. And not only that, but if you provoke him, his undertakings will be successful. As it is stated, his ways prosper at all times, Psalm 10:5. And not only that, but even if he is brought to court, he emerges victorious in judgment. As it is stated, your judgments are far above him, Psalm 10:5. As though the trial is far removed from him and does not affect him. And not only that, but he will see his enemies fall. As it is stated, as for all his enemies, he hisses at them. We're being warned. This is very good practical advice. There are some people who are just wicked charlatans, but they're enjoying a lot of success in this world. That is someone whose hour is smiling on them. This is not the time to take them on. But we may well live to see how the mighty are fallen later. You got to pick your moment when to go at these people who seem to be having a string of luck. And the Gemara asks, and it may well be, why, I'm not going to give a bunch of names, but, the news in the last 2-3 years is filled with super powerful people taking a total nosedive, right? People who thought that they were on top of their industry, the most powerful, could say anything, do anything, abuse anyone, however they want, and they finally took that total fall, right? Okay, so while they're having that success, be wary of them. Why would we live in such a world where these evil, wicked, nasty people would have so much success in this world? Well, we've seen that before. Whatever success they have in this world, that's the end of their rewards, right? When they get to the next world, it's like they've used up all their good stuff, and now they're destined to a long period of, suffering and making up and punishment for the wickedness that they did in this world. Now the Gemara asks, is that so, that you shouldn't take on an evildoer when the hour seems to be smiling at him? But didn't Rabbi Yochanan say in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, it is permitted to provoke the wicked in this world. As it is stated, they that forsake the Torah praise the wicked, but they who keep the Torah contend with them. No, you got to take on the wicked. What are you talking about? You don't take on the wicked because they're very successful. Absolutely, we got to tear down the wicked. We can't let that kind of injustice proceed. And furthermore, it is taught in a baraisa that Rabbi Doste Bar Matan said, it is permitted to provoke the wicked in this world. And if a person whispers to you to say that this is not so, relying on the verse, contend not with evildoers, nor be envious against the workers of iniquity, know that only one whose heart strikes him with pangs of conscience over sins that he committed says this. So this is just the opposite now. The one who says, listen, the Psalm says, don't contend with evildoers, just let them be. He is maybe contending with his own conscience, and that's why he's saying that. But no, absolutely, we should take on all the doers of iniquity. Rather, the true meaning of that verse, contend not with evildoers, what it means is don't be like the evildoers. The meaning of nor be envious against the workers of iniquity, that means don't be like the workers of iniquity. And it says elsewhere, let not your heart envy sinners, but be in the fear of the Lord all the day. Proverbs 23:17. In this context, to be envious of sinners means to desire to be like them. And Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Dostai indicate that one is permitted to provoke the wicked against the opinion of Rabbi Yitzhak. So now we have two views. Should you take on evildoers who are very successful, or should you not? And the Gemara explains this is not difficult, la kasha, as it can be understood that this Rabbi Yitzhak's statement that one may not provoke the wicked is referring to his personal matters. While the statements of Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Dostai that it is permitted to provoke them is referring to matters of heaven. So you might say, well, if you've had a problem with some real jerk who's taking advantage of you, and now you want to go sue him, right, to get what's rightfully yours, may or may not be a good idea. You might win, or you might even lose more, and it might have been better for you just to walk away and accept the loss. Maybe you should have known better than to get involved with this crook in the first place. However, when we're talking about a crook who's doing damage to other people, like sex predators come to mind, absolutely you got to go after those people and make sure that they end up in prison. And this is matters of heaven, right? So you're defending the powerless. And if you wish, say, both this statement and that statement are stated with regard even to your own affairs, and still it is not difficult. This statement that is permitted to provoke the wicked applies to a completely righteous individual. If you're sure that you are a righteous individual, go ahead, take them on. But that statement that one should not provoke them applies to an individual who is not completely righteous. As Rav Huna said, what is the meaning of that which is written? Why do you look upon them that deal treacherously and remain silent when the wicked devours the man that is more righteous than he? Habakkuk 1:13. And the verse indicates that the wicked devours one who is more righteous than he, but he does not devour one who is completely righteous. And if you wish, say instead, when the hour is smiling upon him, i.e., when the wicked individual is enjoying good fortune, it is different. He is receiving divine assistance, and even the completely righteous should not provoke him. Having mentioned Rome, back to the subject of Rome, the Gemara cites what Ula said. Greek Italy, i.e. southern Italy, is the great city of Rome, and it is 300 parasangs, 300 parasang by 300 parasang. It has 365 markets corresponding to the number of days of the solar year, and the smallest of them all is the market of the poultry sellers, which is 16 mil by 16 mil. They're saying that the land of Rome is vast and powerful and fully settled, and like compared to little tiny Israel, it's just a vast and powerful empire. And the king, i.e. the emperor of Rome, dines every day in one of them. And one who resides in the city, even if he was not born there, receives an allowance for his living expenses from the king's palace. And one who was born there, even if he does not reside there, also receives an allowance from the king's palace. This is like the poor Torah scholars, working in Babylonia, talking about how crazy rich the Romans are, those crazy rich Romans. And there are 3,000 bathhouses in the city and 500 apertures that let the smoke from the bathhouses out beyond the walls in a way that doesn't blacken the walls themselves. And one side of the city is bordered by the sea, and one side by the mountains and hills, one side by a barrier of iron, and one side by gravel and swamp. So it's a really impregnable and powerful city, seemingly that will never fall, and eventually Rome fell completely. That concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 2. Now we're just going to read Mishnah number 3 and get to your comments and questions. If the people, Mishnah number 3 here in chapter 1, if the people read the Megillah during the first Adar, right? So when there's a leap year in the Hebrew calendar, we add a whole month. What month? We add a second Adar. Adar is the month that has Purim in it. So it's the happiest month, right? The most joyful, celebratory month. And so if we're going to add a month, let's add another Adar. And that's what we do. So where are we? So if the people read the Megillah during the first month of Adar, and subsequently the year was intercalated by the court, and now the following month will be the second Adar. Now normally, when the calendar is set far in advance, which has been the case for centuries, we know whether there's going to be one Adar or two. But back in ancient times, when the Sanhedrin would determine when a new month began, it also determined whether a second Adar needed to be added. If they waited so late that they're adding the second Adar, even after we've already celebrated Purim in first Adar, well then what do? If Purim is normally celebrated in the second Adar, but we already celebrated Purim in first Adar, what do? That's what this mission is about. So if one read the Megillah, celebrated Purim, and read the Megillah during first Adar, and subsequently the year was intercalated by the court, and they added second Adar, one reads the Megillah again during the second Adar. And the sages formulated a principle. The difference between the first Adar and the second Adar with regard to the mitzvahs that are performed during those months is only that the reading of the Megillah and distributing gifts to the poor are performed in the second Adar and not in the first Adar. So you read the Megillah in second Adar Purim, and you give gifts to the poor on the same day that you read the Megillah. But in terms of rejoicing on the festival of Purim and recalling the events of Purim, etc., you do that in both Adars according to this Mishnah. And what is the law? If the people read the Megillah during the first Adar, and then the year was intercalated, they read it again in second Adar. Now, this hasn't happened since the calendar was fixed for all time, but when the Messiah comes back, when Mashiach finally comes, so then, the Sanhedrin will probably, or perhaps, maybe probably, or certainly, I'm not even sure, be reestablished because the temple will be rebuilt. So the Sanhedrin should also be reestablished. And then they will receive testimony from witnesses and determine when the month is going to start, when each new month is going to start. And therefore, they would also be intercalating the years and adding Adar. So in that situation, if they waited that late, we would read the Megillah twice. But normally, it is prohibited to eulogize and fast on the 14th and the 15th days of the first Adar. And one does not recite the Tachanun prayer, the daily Tachanun prayer, which we say, we have sinned, but we don't do that on Shabbos and festival days, so we don't do that on Purim. And some maintain that a eulogy is permitted, but the custom is to prohibit it. And some say that one should eat and drink more in these days, but that is not the law, although the Rima writes that one should eat and drink a bit more on these days. So nowadays, when there's a second Adar, we read the Megillah, give gifts to the poor, and basically celebrate Purim in the second Adar. However, even now, it's prohibited to eulogize or fast on the 14th and 15th, even of the first Adar, when that comes up in the calendar. Okay, let's go to your comments and questions. All right, Sharon, I'm a little confused by names here. We spoke of Megillah reading, a storyline in Persia, which takes place after Persia defeated Babylonia. Why is it continuing to refer to cities as being in Babylonia, which is no longer by the time of Purim? Yeah, great question. Great question. We call it the Talmud Bavli. I guess because what they're talking about is that the cities that are, that Pumbedisa, Nehardea, Surya, the sort of big cities of yeshivas and Torah learning, which was the Babylonian Jewish community since the Babylonian exile, which happened during the time. At the time that, you're talking about the events of Purim, when Persia had already defeated Babylonia, but that had just happened. Right, that was like really, really recent. That's why Ahasuerus was like making this big celebration that he'd been ruling for a while, because it was like he was establishing, like, whenever one empire takes over another empire, there's danger that may not last. But I think that the Persian Empire was vast, and they were still referring to the Babylonian part of it as that region, right? So it's like the Bavli region, I would say, within the Persian Empire. That's my guess. But nevertheless, it's much, much later that we're talking about, the Talmud Bavli, much, much later. It's 1,000 years later than the Purim story, and they're still calling it, Bavel and Bavli. So there you go. Multiple people wondering why this is the first time they've heard about two messiahs. Yeah, this is beyond the scope of this class, but this idea that there's going to be a Mashiach ben Yosef, right, a descendant of Joseph, either through Ephraim or Menashe, and then there's going to be Mashiach ben David, which is like the final Mashiach, the one that we're always talking about, and that there would be a joining. This is one of the prophecies, I think it's in Ezekiel, right? And talking about how, and also, I think it's also a little bit related to the idea that the kingdom of Israel was split, that there was a northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, and that all the Jews are going to be united, right? And so there's going to come this Mashiach ben Yosef, but, when you talk about, even in general culture, you talk about apocalyptic times. That's also part of Jewish eschatology, that before the end comes, there's going to be, I'm not sure where it says it in the Talmud, but I recall one of the sages saying, may the Messiah come soon, and may I not live to see it. Because there's also going to be the war of Gog and Magog, right? There's going to be, a lot of cataclysm before the end comes. Now, some are saying, I think particularly in Chabad, sort of theology these days, that, well, we've already had enough suffering. Like the calamities predicted before the end of times has actually already happened. Things like the Holocaust and the world wars, etc. And maybe we've already lived through that. But we haven't seen Mashiach ben Yosef. So, I'm not like prepared and studied up enough that I can say something intelligent about it. But if you're curious about this subject, look it up. Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David. Bill, it's fascinating because, of course, at the time, Germania was populated by a variety of tribes, the most powerful of whom were the Franks, who would eventually, under their king Charlemagne, and the Karling dynasty as a whole, be recognized as the legitimate successors of the Roman emperors in the West by the Roman Catholic papacy. So, when the sages say Germania, the best thing to picture in your mind is the classical barbarian horde or maybe Klingons. But this idea, right? I mean, it's interesting because the way history recapitulates itself, here the sages are saying that thank God that the Romans are always busy warring with these barbarian tribes, so they don't have like the full, attention and military ability to come and oppress us over here in the East, right? They're so busy in Europe. And likewise, some key to Israel's survival, modern Israel, the state of Israel, was that its enemies could never get united and get together and to make a concerted, united attack. Thank God they were busy at war with each other. Same idea. And finally, Sam Richardson, would this statement of having bitachon, faith, trust, for parnasa also apply to charitable fundraising? Yeah, I think so. Right. So this idea, what Sam is referring to, is when it's said that, that in terms of Torah study, somebody who tells you that they work hard and didn't have success, don't believe them, or they had success and didn't work hard, don't believe them. If you work hard, you'll have success. That's in Torah study. But in matters of business, it's in the hands of heaven, right? So you really have to have faith, and you have to pray and dedicate yourself and be partners with heaven, right? By tithing, always tithe. Always give 10% of your income to the causes that you believe in, right? So now Sam is saying, well, would having this faith in one's livelihood, in parnasa, apply also to charitable fundraising? I mean, I think so. I think anybody who is starting a nonprofit or running a nonprofit has to have some faith that the work that they're doing is important and that people will support it, or they'd never, get started in that project. And we run a nonprofit, and sometimes it's really scary. Like, are we going to make our budget? Are people going to believe it enough? Are we going to be able to pay all the people that we work with, from our assistant, our webmaster, people that we work with on marketing, people that we work with on Google marketing, when we're making videos, now that we need to build the AT app? All of that costs money. It might seem like, hey, it's just me at my desk talking to a camera, but there's like a lot that we're involved in running this nonprofit. And that's why we rely on people's donations. And we just have to have faith that people are going to believe in it. Sometimes it can be discouraging. You had a big donor who was able to donate last year. He's not able to donate this year. And it's going to really have an impact. But then you say, well, hopefully God believes in what we're doing and wants us to succeed, and somebody else will show up. And so far, that's how it's happened. Okay, my friends, that's what we've got tonight. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow. Sunday, for a big Daf Zion here in Tractate Megillah. Beautiful, epic, classic story about Rabbah and Rabbi Zera celebrating Purim together. Monday night, I'll just mention, there won't be class because I'm doing a personal appearance speaking to a group. I won't be able to teach class, so we'll have a double class on Tuesday. But tomorrow night, big Daf, page 7 here in Tractate Megillah. All the best, and may you be blessed with a great week. All the best.